Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Anthrax-War, the untold story of the 2001 anthrax attacks and the dark secrets of the hidden world of modern-day germ warfare research. We have two amazing investigative journalists with us who made this film. And I tried to read their whole bios. We've run out of time, but Bob Coen is a filmmaker, journalist, and war correspondent whose work is always focused on uncovering hidden truths. He was based in Africa for 15 years. I'd like to get him on, just talk about those adventures and perspective, and was a correspondent for CNN International. And he has received major prizes for Best Television War Correspondent for reporting from Liberia. He was also made award-winning films, which include Mozambique, The Struggle for Survival, Angola, Triumph or Tragedy, and Blood and Memory has been broadcast on CNN International, National Geographic, PBS, and Channel 4 UK, among others. He is also a consultant to the United Nations in conflict zones and humanitarian emergencies. Eric Nadler is an author, TV producer, and filmmaker. He has written for Rolling Stone, Mother Jones, Harper's, New Republic, and has had his films been featured in PBS, Sundance Channel, Court TV, United States, and broadcast internationally. He's produced several PBS frontline programs, including BCCI, Bank of Crooks and Criminals. Got to get him on about that, Clark Clifford. And The Secret Arming of Saudi Arabia, his theatrical film. And it just goes on and on. I got to have you guys on repeatedly, obvious, because, I saw your film, liked it, and then, read the work you've done, but this is really exciting. All right, I'm going to shut up. Let's get into how you made the film, why you made it, and what it covers. This is quite a story.
Well, the film began with those anthrax attacks, Alex, and we all remember how, just weeks after 9/11, these anthrax letters happened, and they caused panic all across the country, all across the world. And, it was in the headlines. People were buying Cipro. And then after about 2 months or so, it started fading. The FBI started focusing on one culprit, and nothing seemed to be happening with the FBI investigation. And we were convinced that to really understand the anthrax attacks, we had to take a look at this world of germ war research here in the United States and internationally. And that's what we did with this film. We started looking into this secret world of germ weapons to try and understand the anthrax attacks.
Again, that voice or that person you see at prisonplanet.tv is Bob Coen. Eric, obviously you already knew Mr. Coen. You got into this the same way, or how did you guys approach this? Obviously you learned more as you investigated, or were you aware of this when you got into it, the darker ramifications?
Well, Bob and I had a personal relationship for many years in terms of years ago there was a PBS program called South Africa Now. In the final days of the apartheid regime, a few network producers got together and were very concerned how that censorship restrictions were being put on American networks, and thus the actual coverage of the South African situation as the white regime collapsed really fed less and less into the network news budget. And there were some people who got together and said to PBS, can we get together and keep the South Africa issue on the front lines? And that's where I met Bob. Bob was a great correspondent for CNN, and I was a freelance journalist here in the United States. When it came time for the anthrax attacks, it struck me in a very deep position. I had never seen a more serious story disappear so quickly from the mainstream news media without much questioning. In other words, everyone talked about 9/11. Yes, that was the most serious story you could ever do. And there were anniversaries about 9/11 and beautiful documentaries with shining lights into the sky. But when it came to the anthrax attacks, there was silence. And the anthrax attacks, as we say in our film, Anthrax-War, was a 1-2 punch against the Republic. 9/11 was the left jab, and the anthrax attacks was the right cross. And people didn't remember that really knockout punch. Look, my wife works in Rockefeller Center in New York, and she remembered the planes flying. She heard them. The planes flying toward the World Trade Center that terrible morning. She heard that. And she's a tough gal. But where she really lost it was when they opened up anthrax envelopes in the media center next door to her. And she screamed to me over the phone. The first time I heard this tough feminist lawyer woman scream to me, Eric, we gotta buy Cipro. And I knew some line had been crossed, that some terrorism had been done fundamentally upon educated media government people. And I said to myself, yikes, the anthrax attacks, that's the most important piece of business. And if you remember, it went silent for many years. And then Bob, who I'd worked with years earlier, had come to me after we had not been with each other for a while. He was in Africa, I was in New York. He came to me and said, Eric, what's up with these anthrax attacks? And I said, you know, Bob, I think this is the most serious thing that we as investigative journalists can take a look at. And I know you at CNN have tried, and I know me at a million other mainstream outlets have tried. Let's be independent. Let's see what's really going on here. And that became the genesis of our investigation.
Now, again, you guys are joining us not just on the radio, but live in living color from New York at prisonplanet.tv. The film is Anthrax-War. The website is anthraxwar.com. Again, you can also get the film there or at Infowars.com. Now, this film needs to be seen. Gentlemen, let's start getting into the evidence of this being a cover-up, but just briefly mentioning what happened at that time. I was obviously glued to television and radio, covering the 9/11 attacks myself, and 9/11 kind of built its peak of hysteria, and then suddenly the anthrax, and for a week or two, it was as big as the 9/11 attacks, and they were taking over the Capitol and the federal government. The executive was ordering the Capitol evacuated, which was a violation of the separation of powers, and Democratic enemies were getting sent anthrax, and people that had taken photos of the Bush daughters in Austin falling down on each other drunk in a provocative pose were getting the letters, and it was clearly meant to blame it on Muslims, and the FBI said, this is run-of-the-mill, no big deal, but I had bioweapons experts on saying this is incredibly deadly. Only Russia, the United States, and England can make it this deadly. Then it turned out it was the super miniaturized with the bentonite, magnetized. I mean, it was the special, sci-fi grade U.S. signature, and of course the film covers that. And then the different patsies, and then murdering a patsy, and they finally got a patsy they could shut up because the last two patsies were proven innocent. So let's go over that. But I mean, you guys are journalists, TV guys. You were there at the time. Wasn't for a week or so the anthrax as big as 9/11, and then it's like it never happened?
Absolutely. I mean, this was our sort of scariest nightmare come to life, the attack of invisible germs. This is something we could not see. These were, who sent it? It went through the mail. This was an attack against all of us because it was sent through the mail. This could have gone to everybody, and it was
everybody gets the mail. The perfect psychology. Go ahead. Yeah.
And in some ways, it also fed on our fears that had been tickled, let's say, by so many of these Hollywood movies about, bio attacks. But here it was, real life. And so, yeah, it caused huge panic across the U.S., across the globe. There were copycat attacks. Cipro, this antibiotic that was the treatment for anthrax. Their stocks went through the roof. People were buying Cipro. But as you said, Alex, after a couple of weeks of being in the headlines, the story faded. The FBI announced it had this huge investigation, but it's pretty quickly seemed that investigation was not going anywhere. I mean, they had a so-called person of interest, this Army scientist by the name of Stephen Hatfield, and very early on, the FBI were convinced that they could blame it on one person. There was a lone gunman. There was just one person behind this. And that's one of the things that we decided to look at. We said, well, actually, it's much bigger than this. We've actually got to look at this from an international perspective because, the kind of anthrax that was sent, especially to Congress, was very, very sophisticated. When the FBI scientists examined the anthrax that was used in the attacks against the congressman, that anthrax, when they examined it in the lab, in this BSL-3 lab, high containment lab, they put it on a microscope, and the anthrax actually lifted up and floated into the air. And the scientists had never seen any anthrax of this sophistication ever before. So this was super sophisticated anthrax, and it really meant that this had come out of a state-sponsored program.
That's right. I mean, it was a U.S. government weapon strain. It was miniaturized. It was magnetized. It was coated in bentonite. It was made to float around.